Welcome to the Compose Like a Girl podcast. I'm your founder, host, and composer, Jocelyn Hagan. My Compose Like a Girl initiative amplifies female-identifying composers, helps conductors diversify their concerts, and works toward more equality in music programming and commissioning. I've been sitting down for conversations with some amazing composers, and I want to invite you into these deeper explorations of art and life. I hope you leave with some inspiration, just as I did. On today's episode, I'm sharing a recent conversation I had with Gabriela Lena Frank. She's included in the Washington Post's list of the most significant women composers in history. She's the winner of a Latin Grammy and has been nominated for Grammys as both composer and pianist. And these are just a few of her many honors. What a joy to get to interview such an accomplished and incredible musician. Thanks for tuning in and enjoy. Hi, Gabriela. Nice to have you here today.
Hi, Jocelyn. Thanks for having me.
I was reading through your welcome statement from your Creators Academy while I was prepping for our conversation, which I encourage people to go read. One line that really struck me was how you talk about self-knowledge as part of your life and your work. You write that, "My sense of self has developed inexorably along the simple principle of storytelling and creating objects of beauty through sound, leaving the earth hopefully a bit better." I really love that. It really resonated with me. Can you tell me more about what motivated you to write that?
I think in our modern times that it's very easy to sleepwalk through life, to have aspirations that have been defined for you by mentors or by economic need or by the culture, whatever discipline that you're going in. For composers, this might mean winning certain kinds of prizes or going to the right school or composing with a checklist of the most trendy sounds, effects, mannerisms that one needs to use if they're going to get on the new music gig circuit in a major city and work up that prestigious performer ladder. These are the kinds of values that are often upholded in a standard classical music conservatory for a composer. But I often tell the composers that come through my academy or say in a conservatory that it's a good experiment to think about the music industry and the music academy, academia, I should say, as middlemen between you and the world. They are industries and arenas that you'll have to reckon with, but what if they were not there? What stories would you tell? Would you have that checklist of sonic effects, by your desk, for instance? And would you worry about trying to impress a certain performer or a conductor or a president of a major orchestra? What are the stories you want to tell? And once you phrase it that way, a composer must ask, well, what are the stories that are mine? And you only know your own stories by knowing yourself. Then this begins to define what are going to be the tools in your technical kit, what's going to be the repertoire that you yourself consider canonical that you're going to study. It shapes everything differently. And so I think self-knowledge is critical for a creative and artistic life.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think about, finding your voice and figuring out what that is, what stories you're telling. And also it makes me think of this amazing quote that I heard after David Bowie died. And I wish I could remember who said it because I quote it all the time and I can't give them credit, but it is, "We don't mourn artists because we knew them. We mourn them because they helped us know ourselves." I just love that idea. And in thinking about then what you just said is how it's all very circular, right? So how do we get to know ourselves? And a lot of times it's how we travel through the art of our peers, right? And the art that really moves us.
I completely agree. I think art is not born in a vacuum, and artists are often reacting, responding to other artworks that have moved them, and often not in their discipline. And even people that are not professionally creative will have a similar response. I've had people that I have the briefest of encounters with, say they're a member of an audience and they've heard a big orchestra work of mine, and they catch me at intermission, and just over a few seconds, they tell me what it meant to them, or they want to connect, and they say, "I've been to Peru, I've scaled Machu Picchu," or my daughter's best friend is from Latin America, or sometimes that piece that you wrote about Peru, it could have been about my ancestry in Ukraine or Nigeria, and people will complete that experience of meaning, and they will learn something about themselves because the meaning is often triggered from their own life experiences. I think that's the beauty of art, even though we may be the creators and put the double bar line on and proofread it and say, "It's done. I'm sick of this piece. I don't want to think about it anymore." The listener and the performers and the interpreters and everybody else, even the critics, are the ones that complete that piece of artwork, and they do so in their own vision.
Yeah. Oh, I love thinking about it that way, that we're all connected and that truly the
Hmm.
art keeps going long after we've created it. That's one of
Hmm.
my favorite things about music is that unless you perform all of your own creations yourself, which, we don't do, the music has to be processed and interpreted by other musicians to bring it to life. And so often that process takes a long time. It takes a lot of time to write a piece of music and then to rehearse a piece of music often before it comes to life. People are often surprised at how long it takes for that whole process to take place and how it isn't really ended until the audience that people hear it and think about it. And yeah, um, it's a beautiful process.
It really is, yeah.
Do you think that storytelling, I know you think about it a lot when you compose, does it make its way into every one of your pieces?
I think it does. I think even if it's not super overt to the performer or the listener of the piece of music, it's so much a part of my process. I don't consider myself writing abstract music. Sometimes the story that I have in my head, I feel might be limiting to the performer or to the audience. So I don't necessarily title a piece a certain way to incline them to my story. I don't necessarily write a program note. I may a program note that dictates the specifics of the story. I might hint at something more universal. I wrote a piece recently, my last string quartet. I have a lot of string quartets, and this one I think is the ninth one. It's called a Psalm of Disquiet for the Fry Street Quartet, and I talked about a kind of psalm that spiritual believers, people of faith, and atheists and agnostics alike can sing. And it's one that is of disquiet, is disturbed by the events of the planet over the last 5, 8, 10 years. And there's just so much going on right now. And that we can sing this psalm lustily, we can sing it with resolve, we can sing it quietly. And I think a lot of people will tap into that disquiet and relate to it. They'll relate to a somber ending that's still yet optimistic for a better, more joyful future. But they will project their own specific experiences and interpretation on that. And I may not necessarily relate what mine are. Now, to somebody like the Five Street Quartet, they are so wonderful. They're based out of Utah, Logan, Utah. I'm very good friends with them, and we're at a similar stage of life, and we just come from such different backgrounds. But musicians find one another, these kindred spirits. And now that they've made it their own, I might now tell them what I was thinking, and I know it won't interfere with their process. It might even enrich it with new vistas.
Yeah, yeah, that's really interesting. I think about how that relationship that a conductor or a first musician to see a new piece of music and how it's usually a really big deal, right? We don't get new pieces of music very often. And so upon receiving it, it can be this kind of sacred relationship that begins with the interpretive process. And I like the idea of letting them find their own story or their own meaning and what the music means. Both are really important. So letting them find their own and then also explaining what yours is too. There's value in both. And I think that's great to acknowledge.
Yeah, there's definitely a balance. I will say that I think, the composers of the past, when they are interpreted by descendants today, there is a feeling of something very sacred. And not so much with living composers, and I think in a good way. There's more of a give and take. There's more, hopefully, a workshopping element to it. Ideally, a composer would start getting readings of their music from day one and be
Right.
able to discover the piece and not feel like they have to have a blueprint or understand what it's about. And it's easier to discover the piece when you're in a collaborative process.
Yeah, I find the whole process actually quite overwhelming. If the piece is really large, so I had two kind of big pieces recently premiered, and with both, I had just a small amount of rehearsal time with each of them, and it
Yeah,
and it's like I get very overwhelmed with all the sounds coming at me, and it's hard to live in the moment and really feel everything that went into that piece, the emotions that I poured into it. It's hard
sure.
to do all that in a short time frame.
It's definitely a skill.
Mhm.
You have to shorten what I call the deer in the headlights syndrome when you're trying to reconcile what's actually happening to what you've been hearing in your head or even through your computer for months and sometimes
Mhm.
years.
Yeah.
And in the face of reality, there is a good process of amnesia. You start to forget what you have been hearing all this time, or double tracking. You're hearing a track of what you have in your head at the same time something's happening on the stage, and that can be very disorienting as well. The last factor is that the orchestra is still learning the piece.
Yeah.
So they're not close to their polished performance. They're not balancing their sound against other players on the other side of the stage. The conductor is still learning it. It's kind of astonishing what we can put together in 30 minutes or 45 minutes of rehearsal time. But I'm hoping that the culture of large ensemble life will shift to make it more collaborative. That's the kind of environment in which living music will really thrive.
I'd love to hear you talk more about your opera, about Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera. How did this work come about?
So, El Último Sueño de Frida Diego, The Last Dream of Frida and Diego, with my longtime collaborator, Nilo Cruz. He's a Cuban American playwright who won a Pulitzer about 20 years ago for his play Anna in the Tropics. He wrote a wonderful, amazing story about the Mexican iconic painters Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera. And there is an opera called, I believe, simply Frida by Robert Rodriguez, a Texas based Chicano Mexican American composer. And that one is sort of my understanding is like a biopic. And so we knew we didn't want to tread that territory. And biographies can be tricky depending on what elements that you pick up. So what Nilo decided to do was to set this in a fantastical environment. And we know in real life that Frida died 3 years before Diego did. And of course, they had a tumultuous relationship with one another, were celebrities, international celebrities in their lifetime, and really fascinated with Mexican history and Mexican pre conquest history as well. So with Frida dying 3 years before Diego and Diego dying in 1957, just a few days after the Day of the Dead festival, El Dia de los Muertos, Nilo decided to make this an opera about Frida as a spirit coming back to reminisce with Diego during a Day of the Dead festival as he's about to die, and he's asking her to help him cross over. And so the whole entire first act is about trying to get Frida to agree. The queen of the underworld, Katrina, who's a prankster, and gets to decide which of her spirits have been good, which have been bad, who gets to go back to visit with their loved ones still back in the world of the living, wants Frida to go back, and she wants to cause trouble. And Frida is determined not to go back. And she hasn't gone back for 3 years since her passing. because she's still mad. And Frida eventually, of course, decides to go back at the end of the act, but not to see Diego. She wants to go back to paint. She's missing her colors. So when they do have this reunion, it's not a reunion of love, rejuvenated. Diego wants her, but she's just wanting to paint. And so, of course, then the goal of the second act is how to get her to reconcile with Diego and to help him die and to cross over into eternity, the world of the dead.
Wow, that sounds amazing. I might just have to make a trip to go see that. And it's had a lot of performances since it premiered. Sounds like it's been very well received to have gotten that many performances.
Whew, I think the first feeling we had was relief because we put so much time into it, but also it took a long time to get to the stage. When I was first approached about writing the opera, that was back in 2007. And I was in my early to mid 30s and my career was just beginning to move. And we were an all Latino team and the opera was going to be in Spanish and people were cautious. And so there were other storylines and other artists getting work. And this could have languished. It really could have. And we decided, Nilo and I, that we were going to work together anyway. And so the opera is something like our 13th or 14th project together. We worked on the Conquest Requiem. Mm-hmm. We worked on Art Song. We worked on a video short with the LA Opera that came out during the pandemic. The Las Cinco Lunas de Lorca, the 5 Moons of Lorca, that has an incredible video with a flamenco dancer, Irene Rodriguez. You have to have a kind of determination for the disappointments in this business. And so it came to the stage and it benefited, as all works do when you have a relationship with the librettist or your collaborators. So our first sense was, thank God, after all these years of thinking about this storyline, and then to just realize what a blessing, how fortunate we are, and everything came together so beautifully with the singers and the conductors and the set design, and the reception has been so far beyond what we could have ever imagined. Nilo and I are just super grateful.
Here's an excerpt from the San Diego Opera Company's production, featuring mezzo-soprano Guadalupe Paz as Frida Kahlo. This is Scene 6 from Act 1, where Frida wakes in the underworld and is asked to return to the world of the living to help Diego transition into death. It's so validating to hear you, who is very successful in this career, to talk about failure and having things take a long time to come to fruition. I think sometimes when we're in the process of figuring out what our careers are going to look like as artists and composers, it can be easy to get frustrated and to wonder if, what you're doing is making any difference and if you'll ever get to where you want to be. So it's great to hear you still that was a bit of a struggle even recently.
Most definitely. Gosh, the artistic life is a very open-ended life, and it's one that doesn't have regularity to it. And anything you can do to create regularity with your creativity, I think is beneficial. And sometimes that might mean downsizing your projects so they are simply less expensive to create. Other times it might mean getting a day job and to fund some of these projects, because then somebody else with more resources sees a smaller version of what you've done. They see the talent, they see what's in it, and they say, let me partner with you to bring it to a bigger stage. And I have seen that. I have gotten gigs because of something very small and humble. I'll give you an example. The Conquest Requiem, if we were to trace the path to that, because it's huge. How do you get an orchestra to agree to give you 35 to 40 minutes, the first half of a concert or the second half of a concert, and a huge choir, very difficult music, and soloists? They have to pay the artist as well. And this is a requiem that's in multiple languages, including indigenous languages of Central America.
Wow.
And
Hmm.
they agreed to let me be the dramaturg. So I was working with a graduate student at UC Davis to put together the texts and translate them from Native American ancient languages. And I storyboarded the whole thing, which is a story of Malinche. She was Cortez's concubine, Cortez being the, quote, conqueror, the conquistador over the Aztecs. So how does one get to something big like that? Well, that came 10 years after a viola concerto for the principal violist of the Houston Symphony in 2007. So it took 10 years for that bounce. Now, how did I get the viola concerto? I got the viola concerto because 2 years before that, I wrote a 5-minute trio with piano, flute, and clarinet. No viola in sight, no orchestra, 5 minutes. And the assistant conductor and the conductor happened to be at that concert in Houston, a small chamber music series. Now, how did that piano trio come about? The pianist was somebody who was the staff accompanist at the school that I went to in the 90s. So between 1990 and 94, we became friends. And then 11, 12 years later with the trio, 2 years later with the viola concerto, 10 years later with the Conquest Requiem. But it went back to my undergrad years.
That's a fabulous story. And I thank you so much for sharing it in that way, because the number of steps that we have to take to finally get to,
Absolutely.
something big. Yeah. Or the possibility of something big. There's a lot and you can't just skip them.
Maybe some people can. I'm humble and I can't. Whether it's from the vantage point of a storyteller or it's from the vantage point of a skill set, a technical skill set, or the vantage point of the creative habit, the creative discipline, which is separate from a technical skill set. And then on top of that, building your community. So in that long journey to the Conquest Requiem, I just went across the hallway to the staff accompanist across my practice room. That was my community. My community was
Yeah.
very circumscribed within a few feet of me. It wasn't all the way, to the big orchestra and fancy players. It was very, very small. And most of my projects today, I think I could trace back to very humble origins.
Yeah.
Wonderful, wonderful, personal, intimate origins, deep, authentic origins, but not glamorous.
Gabriela's Conquest Requiem is a trilingual choral work that explores the Spanish conquest of the Americas through the perspectives of Malinche and her son, Martin, combining traditional Requiem Mass text with original lyrics by Nilo Cruz. These new texts focus on personal stories of trauma, identity, and survival. I really love the effect and interplay of incorporating new texts into the Requiem Mass. I did this myself with my own Requiem, Ashes of Roses, years ago. Reimagining the Requiem as commentary on a particular subject provides a compelling means of reshaping and contextualizing the emotional and conceptual depth of prayers for the dead. Let's listen now to the third movement of the Conquest Requiem, Dies Irae, performed by the Nashville Symphony Chorus and Orchestra, conducted by Giancarlo Guerrero. This movement features baritone Andrew Garland.
mestizo, hijo de Malinche, la traidora, y Hernán, el nos alolos,
I'd love to bring up something that is also in one of your bios that I read, which was that the Washington Post listed you as one of the most significant women composers in history in 2017. And how do you feel about that?
Well, I was standing in some very good company, so I was very flattered. And if you had told me that back when I was an undergrad, writing, pieces for my roommates and for myself to play, that those little pieces would be part of the journey that would garner that kind of recognition to be called one of the most significant women composers in history, I would not have believed you. It wasn't even a goal of mine. I wanted to be impactful, but that was a very vaguely defined goal. I wanted to not be wasteful of people's time and energy. I wanted to have a positive impact.
Yeah.
But I never set up the specific goal on getting on a wonderful list and holding company with these wonderful artists.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. And also you got to kind of wonder about the composers that is the final goal, right? What art is made of that kind of I want to use the word strategery from Saturday Night Live, but that's not a real word. But you know what I mean? That idea of, oh, I'm doing this because I want recognition and I want, to be on the stage with these people. And that's never what it was about for me. And it sounds like that was never what it was about for you. We want to be useful. We want to make a difference. We want to tell stories.
I think there's recognition and then there's recognition. And recognition from people you care about is authentic and soul affirming. And recognition from something more anonymous is leverage. That's what I tell the composers I mentor. I say, now the world is listening to you. Now you have leverage. What are you going to do with it? And my hope is that they're not going to incline it just for their own use and their own ends, is that they realize that they can impact the world. They can start bending the universe to them. They can start defining some programs and inclining the industry and the world to a more ethical future. That's what, to me, success is. It's a responsibility. I'm getting paid enough and I can take care of myself. That's a responsibility. That's a privilege. So phrasing it that way keeps me humble. It keeps my head from getting too big because we're all human. And I think it's fine to feel good about a great review and to get a prize and then to give it loftier goals than something that simply soothes your ego. But you have to work on that. You have to work on that kind of aspiration.
This leads pretty well into the main reason why I knew I wanted to interview you for this podcast. And that's because I was talking to my friend John Nectarline, who's the former president of the American Composers Forum. And he was talking about your Creative Academy of Music. What an endeavor that is. Can you tell me about the impetus?
Of course. I never planned on creating a nonprofit. I never had that as a goal to create my own music academy. I thought at some point maybe I would take a professorship. I had certainly been headhunted and asked if I would consider positions at the best places. And I just kept resisting for years because I was doing well enough as a freelancer and able to, even though I didn't have healthcare provided, I had to pay for that myself and pay for my own facilities. I mean, you really are on your own, but then you're on your own. You're your own boss, which is really good. And then 2016 happened, and this was when we were seeing the escalating election between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. And I was just horrified, like much of the country, about how divisive our national discourse was getting, and it was just sinking lower and lower and lower. And then during that summer, I had a gig across country. So from California, my husband and I, we were new homeowners, and we had bought a piece of property about 14 acres in Mendocino County of Northern California, which is one of the last places where you'll see giant redwoods, and it's just beautiful out here. And we packed our dogs into the car and we drove through states where we're seeing these huge MAGA banners. And you know, I'm visibly Latina. You see my heritage, and my husband is a white man, and we kid that he can pass for Jesus or a pirate, or he can look like a hippie, or he can look like a hillbilly. I mean, he just has it all in him with his long hair and his big beard and mustache and fishing pole and gun. But we're both quite progressive in our politics. I got accosted at a truck stop. And I don't physically present as threatening at all. I'm a short, chubby little person, and I was just simply picking up some candy and some water, and from behind, somebody knocked me over, and I fell, and I dropped everything, and I looked up, and there was this very scary white guy standing over me, and he showed me his gun, and he was looking so happy in that moment, and I was very afraid. I remember somehow, acting normal, getting up and paying for everything and going back to the car. And my husband was upset because, he could see that this scary dude was going in and looked like his wife was very unhappy. It was just a bad scene. I barely remember the festival. I was the guest composer, and I hope I did a good job because my mind was in overdrive, and I was thinking, I have to do something. I have to do something. What am I going to do? And I decided over about that week, I designed the academy, the core program of the academy, which is simply bringing together people of very different backgrounds and creating music and getting a piece of music done. It can be very hard to create music in the conservatory, ironically. And I wanted to focus on what every composer needs to do, which is create and to tell their stories. And we would give them lots of workshopping, and I would throw every bit of mentoring and mentorship I had at them. And then it just grew from there. Now, that first year in 2017, we didn't have any sponsorship of any kind. I shouldn't say that. We had my first sponsor gave us a small donation, but we basically paid for the whole thing. We paid, and we had 19 composers come out to California twice for week-long residencies, and 12 performer mentors twice. They came out, and we paid the mentors artist fees, and we lodged everybody. And I like to say that cost me like 3 symphonies in order to fund that whole thing.
Wow.
And after that, we started to be able to fundraise, and the programs have grown. I've been adding on everything that I think composers need. We have a climate intelligence program as a 2-year commitment for my composers, the study group. We work with the scientists. We commission pieces. Our largest commission is a $20,000 orchestral commission with a reading and mentorship with the Annapolis Symphony and a copy fund. We have a constellations program, I call it. They get a constellation of commissions. I tell them, you're going to get 5 commissions over the 3 years. I want you to relax. You're going to have work, and let's see what the progression of these commissions are. And then I matchmake them with good performers. And I have a lot of alums now that come back and help us out. And then, my name is on the academy. And at first I wasn't going to do that, but that first donor, her name is Helen Meyer of Meyer Sound, with her husband, John Meyer. And this is just an amazing, influential company on basically audio technology. And they design the speakers for the Grateful Dead and Metallica.
Mhm.
And she asked me what I was going to name this when it was just an idea, when I was still reeling from that attack over that summer of 2016. And I was coming up with very generic names like Mendocino Music Lab, or the California Creative Workshop. and as I was coming up with the generic stuff, she was just shaking her head, and I just kind of ran out of gas. I just went quiet, and she said, you have to put your name on that. And I was thinking, no, Helen, that's gross. I'm not going to put my name on. It's not about me. And then she said, women don't put their name on things. God darn it. Okay, I'm going to put my name on it. That's right. We're too shy, women, and we need to be leaders. And so I put my name on it. And I'm really glad I did, because it made me excavate my memory banks and really ask what was helpful to me when I was coming of age, and what wasn't helpful, and what's missing. And as long as I can find the money for it, I can just create a program.
You can't see me over here, but my fists are raised and they're pumping like in the air, because this is exactly it. I mean, I feel like we're sisters in this sense of what we want to do with, what we have, and how we want to make it better and make things grow and make it easier for the next generation of composers. And that's where this podcast came from. That's where my choral series and the mentorship came from. And that's why, because I was telling John Nectarline about this stuff that I was doing, he's like, you have to talk to Gabby. And I'm so glad I finally get the opportunity, because I hear you talk about this and I want to be a part of it. It's incredible. And I think it also brings up this big idea that I've been thinking about a lot, and that's the mentorship, or maybe apprenticeship of what you're doing, what I'm doing, and what that's like versus the path of going and into higher ed and getting a degree. With the cost of what it takes to get a degree these days.
Oh, it's terrible.
It's terrible. So I find myself most often recommending to talented composers and say, you can find a way to learn without getting that degree in your name. I stopped after my master's because I had kind of a weird experience in my master's degree, and thought, you know what? I don't think I need to be in this environment anymore. And I'm ready to be with the community of people and to write for all these people that I know. And yeah, I would love to hear you talk maybe a little bit about that, how your program is different from what, going to get a degree in composition would be like.
Well, I am of a similar mindset as far as the value of college degrees. I think the university and conservatory system is transforming, finally. Mm-hmm. When I was in school in the 90s, it was vastly out of date then. And when I am guesting at most music conservatories, I feel like I'm stepping back into a time machine. It's like I'm back in the 90s. I see the same music being played, the same music on the rehearsal bulletin board, and the same music in the practice room. The curriculum is exactly the same. And it was already out of date. But I didn't know that when I first started. And it was just fun to be in that universe for a while. And then I started getting antsy. And I spent a lot of time in classes and in other endeavors in school that ultimately were of zero value. Mm-hmm. And it took me years to be able to articulate that. I felt like in some way I was disloyal for saying that. And I was blessed to find myself in a music conservatory. So that can be very confusing for somebody to navigate. The best blessing that I had was I met a lot of good people. And so the value of a conservatory is the aggregation of other fellow musicians and other fellow composers and peers. If we can provide emerging composers with an opportunity to meet performers outside of school, then school is not the only place to meet people. If we can find composers a way to do an online course of music history that's valuable to them, do we really need to subject everybody to early music? That was of no value to me. And in my view, I think composers, maybe they should get like a 1-year survey of classical music, and then they can pick some areas they want to do, but also make it a requirement that they look at non-classical music and music outside of the West, and to be in ensembles outside the West, to give them a lot of experiences. But I just think we're in a great era of change. And it's not soon enough for the people that are in the conservatories now. So then they have to think about how they're going to get what they need. If you were to look at my report cards from the time, I'm sure they're still in my parents' attic somewhere, back when transcripts were printed out.
Hmm.
That was about 10% of what I was doing in a conservatory. I was playing a lot of music, and I don't have any piano degrees, but that really helped me. And I was traveling as much as I could in Latin America, and I was finding grants from the Women's Studies Department, Romance Languages,
Hmm.
all around the campus, especially at University of Michigan, where I did my doctorate. I was writing all kinds of music that I wasn't necessarily bringing into my lessons. I was just doing a lot of other stuff and got the good out of the music conservatory environment. But if there's a way that we can concentrate what the 21st century artist needs and concentrate that in a bunch of small nonprofits, I don't think composers need to get that degree. But I agree with you. I think for a fraction of the cost that there are other ways to survive and thrive.
Yeah, well, and I love how you talked about, you were doing what was feeding your soul. That was how you were getting that self-knowledge that we talked about at the beginning of the conversation. And you knew what it meant for you. You wanted to travel, you wanted to spend all that time getting all that culture and feeling it and living it in a separate place. And I feel like so often as a composition teacher, what I talk to my mentees about is, what is it that really moves you? What is your journey? What do you want it to be? And that's not something that is really, I can't do that for them. We can't do that for them as their teachers. They have to figure it out by themselves to know what it is, what that music is that they hear, what
Mm-hmm.
makes them tick, what their voice
Mm-hmm.
is. And I feel like so much of an academic degree in composition is not focused on you figuring out how to be an artist and how to make a living doing it, but it's about this is what all the other artists have done and this is where the bar is. And it just feels very, very different and not so much about self exploration. And I think that that's really, for me, what being an artist is. Yeah, self expression, self knowledge.
Yeah, it's interesting because I do remember when I was at Michigan, there was a lot of talk about what's your brand, what's your stick, how you're going to
Mhm.
stand out from the competition. Never what's your voice, which is different, but what's your sound, and very commercial, very even in the concert
Mm.
world, acting very commercial. So, and I do remember when I was in grad school, the Columbine shooting happened, and of course that was pivotal in terms of the shock that the U.S. felt. These kinds of shootings were so uncommon, and that one was so horrific. To me, what was almost as horrific was to hear a composer announce, and he wasn't a bad guy, but a little insufferable sometimes, announced that he was going to write a piece about the Columbine shootings. That was going to be his shtick. And I was horrified. I had never seen such a clear example of a young, misguided artist flailing. He had talent and who was not being guided in the right way. How difficult it is to take trauma that's not yours and to write something that actually makes the world a better place. And it doesn't mean that we have to be frivolous and not touch these issues, but it takes so much self knowledge, so much skill to not be implicitly saying to victims of such violence, this is what your life means to me. It's a stepping stone in my career.
Wow. Thank you for that. There's so much music that kind of taps into that, especially now. A lot of us are very careful about, the approach of that trauma, but you're right. Not all artists are. And it's a strange feeling to be caught up in that or to sit through a performance of something like that when it feels like the purpose of it was a stepping stone to get attention.
Really, first, obviously ask, am I the person to do this? And then how does this make the world a better place?
Mhm.
And to set that high of a bar if you're going to take on those kinds of topics. There have been some operas that I think are successful in taking on really deep topics. Dead Men Walking, by Jake Heggie is one,
Mm-hmm.
and many operas will do this. Now they have 2 hours to make the case or 3 hours to make the case, and they have the visuals, and are the visuals done tastefully? And there's just so many, hopefully, talents that are coming in and taking this job seriously. So when I have a young composer that wants to do critical work, I will sit and we will just talk. And I say, why don't you spend at least 6 months and I just research, and if there are documentaries, watch that because that's a piece of artwork. And if there's music that's a song, listen to that and just do your research first and then see how you feel. And many of them wait, many of them realize it becomes more real to them. Fortunately, this is a different generation
Mm-hmm.
and that are growing up with so much more awareness than my generation, that I have been learning from them about how to take this term social justice and to wield it within our artistic toolkit, within our own arena.
Yeah, that reminds me of another thing that in my research, I was listening to you talk about a few things, and you said that music was the sharpest sword.
I think in another interview, I might have even said inkiest pen. I was just trying to make the point that, as far as I can tell, this is where I'm going to make the most difference.
Yeah.
Is as a composer, and I say this not just about the topics that are dark and the topics that are so serious, but if you're going to be lighthearted, go deep with it. If you're going to be funny, be really funny. And I ask my composers sometimes, this generation is just dealing with so much. And I will say, don't forget to write music for a planet where there's no oppression. What does that look like? You have to write aspirational music as well
Mm-hmm.
and remind ourselves that we're here to find happiness too. So write for a planet in which there is no oppression, like a speculative fiction writer. Imagine that future. Imagine that universe.
That's really an amazing statement. Thank you so much, Gabriela, for spending time with me today and for digging deep into some of these, big questions that we ask ourselves as artists. I appreciate it.
Such a pleasure. Thank you, Jocelyn.
I compose music for so many reasons, but one of my favorite reasons is self-knowledge, to learn about who I am and what I believe. The deep reflection required in the creative process leads to so much more than a performance or a piece of sheet music in the end. With each work, I learn a little more about my craft, what I'm capable of, and how I belong in this world. I am so glad to know that Gabriela feels this as well. So maybe, if you're struggling with understanding something, or the reason why things are the way they are, maybe you need to tear the idea open creatively and find a new perspective. Add something to the conversation. Strip away the layers of doubt and distraction. Find the seed. Composition feeds me in a way that nothing else can. It can feed you too, if you let it. Compose Like a Girl was produced by Justin Schell, Laura Kreider, and me, Jocelyn Hagan, with special help from fellow composers Erica Malpass and Addie Struckman. The Compose Like a Girl theme music was composed by cellist Cicely Parnas. Thank you all for helping me with this vision. Thanks also to the Nashville Symphony Orchestra and the San Diego Opera for their permission to use their recordings on today's episode. You can learn more about Gabriela Lena Frank and her music at wisemusicclassical.com and by following her on social media. Check out the links in our show notes, visit jocelynhagan.com/composelikeagirl, and follow us on Facebook and Instagram to listen to the music we talked about today, learn more about the Compose Like a Girl initiative, and check out past episodes. You can also find choral programming ideas by checking out the Compose Like a Girl choral series through Graphite Publishing. You can subscribe to the Compose Like a Girl podcast wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're so moved, rate us on Apple Podcasts and share it with a few friends who you think will find inspiration. This really helps us create a sustainable podcast. Until next time, trust your instincts. Be brave and unapologetic for your talents. Thanks for listening.